Have we begun?
You are live.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I don't know what your weather's like there, but where we are, it's sunny and windy and warm. So here in Southern California. My name is Annie Wareham. I'm the artistic director at Laguna Playhouse, and I'll be your moderator today for today's Talkback. If you have questions for the panel, you can type them into the chat and they'll get those over to us. So we'll be able to repeat those for you. None of you are actually live on our screen, so I can't see you, but the team at the Laguna Playhouse will make sure that your voices are heard for us. Our panel for tonight, the people you can see in front of you, include Leah Romeo. She's at the bottom of my screen, our playwright. Jim Glossman, our director. And the two wonderful stars of this piece, Wendy Malick and Dan Loria. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being with us on a Sunday afternoon. How's everybody holding up?
Good, pretty good. It's nice to see you again, Annie.
It's really nice to see you again. I haven't seen Wendy. I don't think I've seen either one of you since the beginning of COVID. So it's good. It's good to see your shining faces. Yeah.
Really nice. It's nice to be out.
I had my second COVID vaccine today. So
amazing. I went to an elders post-vaccination gathering in Malibu today.
You did?
Yes, and it was so freeing and exciting. We all went into it was just brilliant. And I realized that was my first party in over a year, and it was kind of heady experience.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I feel like a kid. So as before we had all of our guests come on and join us, I was telling Leah that and the panel that I had first seen this when it first streamed for Durango. And I think we decided the date was January 21st, but I knew about it from when you had written it, Leah, last May. And I watched it again this morning, and boy, it's really remarkable how things change and how quickly they've changed, in the life of a living, breathing piece of theater. I mean, what you wrote then, we've learned so much more now. I mean, does it feel different to you, Leah, what you've done? And talk about that a little bit, the kind of the journey of this story and where we're at now.
Yeah, it does. It's really interesting. I first wrote it, I think, in May of last year, so almost a year ago. And so that was pretty close to the beginning of all of this. Zoom theater was not a thing yet. So it was kind of like, I felt like I was like inventing a thing in a way, which was exciting. It was like, oh, nobody's doing this yet. Like maybe I should do this. And I wonder what that will turn out to be, And so, now we're all a year into this. There's much more technical capability and people know all kinds of things that, none of us really knew at that time. And then I think we filmed in maybe August, and what was interesting about that was like how different it didn't feel from when I had written the play. It was kind of like, okay, we're still here. We're still in this moment. We're still dealing with all these same things. I mean, the play was set like very specifically in a time in New York when people were very, very scared. And I think, by later in the summer, we had moved out of that first like really, really terrible time in New York, although it was really terrible starting to be in other places. So, then that was a little bit more just depended where you were, I think. And then in January, when Durango streamed it, the conversation was very much about, we've been doing this for almost a year and we're still here. It feels like we're still in this moment and these things are all still relevant, but we're all so tired of it, And then now it starts to feel like, I think like, oh, maybe we're not, even starting to come out of it, but we can see what it will look like to start to come out of it. And it feels like there's an end in sight. And so the play starts to feel, at least to me, more like a document of what happened rather than of what is still happening.
Yeah, we may not be seeing the light, but we're seeing at the end of the tunnel, but at least we know where the tunnel is now.
Yeah. And that's what's been so challenging about all of this. One of many things, is just to have no idea when it was going to be over. And that was a big feeling for me when I was writing the play. It was just like, we don't know what's going on here. We don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know what we're going to end up dealing with.
Yeah, and Jim, I mean, how do you, as a director, I'm sure you've done your fair share of this sort of, presentation over the last year, and from the time you guys recorded this, I mean, talk a little bit about what that process was like for you guys. I heard you say on one of these talkbacks that when it was nighttime, when the scene was nighttime, you waited until nighttime to actually shoot the scene. I mean, talk about what that felt like in the beginning and what we've learned since then, how, it's
Sure.
evolved.
Well, I think everybody, I mean, everybody involved, in theater has, I'd say for better or worse, but generally for worse or for worse, has, spent a certain amount of time doing some kind of theatrical activity on Zoom. Often it's doing, readings or performances of plays sort of adapted to Zoom, or doing things in live performance where you try to live stream it. And the thing that I think made this play, as soon as I started to read it, I mean, Leah sent it to me. I got to read it when it was, I think, was it the first draft or like the second draft? It was very early.
Yeah, it was right after I wrote it. I think I had my husband read it, and then I sent it to Jim pretty much right away after that.
And because we had done a bunch of stuff together, and although not a full production yet, we were supposed to do one of those last summer, The Forest. But when I was reading it, it was like somebody opened a door and there was a bright light. It was like, oh, this is a play that is written about what you're going to have to do to put it on. I
Yeah.
mean, that all the obstacles, all the troubles, all the frustrations of trying to push your personality through this pane of glass was going to be what the play is about. And that might sound obvious, but it was like a gift. It was like this, gift that just kept on giving. And when we started doing it, I had already done, and I think Leah had already done, several projects on Zoom, but that weren't written for it, and
Right.
not certainly written for it as eloquently and minimally and beautifully for actors like this is. And as soon as I read it, the first thing I thought was, or I was like on page 4, and I said, Wendy and Dan, this is great for Wendy and Dan. And I asked Leah if that would be all right with her. And I think her response was,
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Honestly, if you can't get anybody else, they'll do.
yeah.
Right.
And I called Dan, and he read it, and then he said he'd call Wendy. Dan, you want to talk about what your react, because it made me very reassured about my response to this play. When I got your response to this play, I think it was like a few hours after I sent it to you.
Yeah, I love the fact that it was written for Zoom, that we weren't trying to force a play onto Zoom. I thought it was a modern day love letter. And I immediately sent it to Wendy, and, the typical reaction, oh, what'd you get me into now? And then she read it and she called back right away and said, this may be the best gift you've ever sent me. That was her exact words. We knew
Yeah,
we
I must say, watching the two of you, and the joy of watching the two of you work is always, you just have this extraordinary chemistry and an ability to make this feel so natural and so real, and what the two of you are able to deliver when you're on a stage is really remarkable. And kudos to you, Leah.
And
because
we worked on it. We worked on it like a play. I mean, and
Yes.
that was, again, they were willing. We spent a week, meeting
Yeah,
and
talk
working
about
on
that.
it. And then we spent the second week shooting it. We usually do 2 to 3 scenes a day, and we did it in order. And we immediately set. It was obvious, we talked about, that we weren't going to do any internal cuts. It was going to be the only editing that was done on the play was after we would shoot a scene all the way through, and if there was anything we were unsatisfied with, or if there was a technical problem, we would go back and we would approach the whole scene again. All that was done afterwards was, putting the scenes in order and adding music and, credits. That was it. It was theater. It was a theatrical experience. And what you said before was that if, as you said, if we had a night scene, we'd just wait a day and we'd shoot that scene at night. And Dan and Wendy would fiddle around with, to make sure that the light in their rooms. Isn't it wonderful how they managed to recreate the sets of the play just for you special today? Look at that, the effort. And the fine costume design by the firm of Malik and Loria LLC. But it was we shot it in order. We shot it so there would be a sense also of time, because time elapses in the play.
I think that's very effective. And when I watched it the second time, I really looked for that. And I mean, that sense of the passage of time and those nighttime conversations, which take on their own intimacy in that, literally in that light you were in.
Well, and then there's that scene that Wendy had all by, with no words, that's just her by herself, in which seems all by itself to endlessly, to just the feeling of being sort of trapped in this, glass, this bell jar where we're slowly taking the air out of it. I watch that scene now. I mean, I watch any of this now and it makes me cry, but I watch that scene now and I can't breathe.
Yeah.
And that's Wendy and Dan.
Wendy, how is that? I mean, look, Wendy's so wonderful, at all of this, and I must say, I first met Wendy when she was doing Just Shoot Me, because my husband was the art director on that show. And the same kind of thing you guys were talking about, doing a scene from start to finish. To me, it was very much like that experience of watching you guys shoot on a Thursday or a Friday night, where you go in, you shoot the scene, then there's the huddle where all the writers and everybody talks about how you're going to change the scene. And then you go back at it and you come back at it again and do it in its entirety. And I think it tells a particular kind of story, the way you're doing it and the way you've done this, as opposed to editing it as you went through.
No, this, I must say, this was like the perfect piece at the perfect time, and one that was one of the most cathartic experiences I've ever had, because I think we all were feeling this sense of being trapped in our own heads, in our own houses, in our own apartments, wherever we were, and sort of going through this universal, really challenging period. And this play, when I read it, was like, oh my God, this is like my get out of jail card. This is like, of all the things that we had read on Zoom, this was the one where I thought, I can't wait to get into this one. This addresses everything I'm feeling, or I know people who are going through this. And it was like therapy. It truly was a gift. And I am so indebted to Leah and to James for thinking of me, and of course, Dan, who I love to work with. But I think we both we couldn't wait to all come together and rehearse this and do it. And I think it also ended up being a kind of gift to our friends and family and audiences out there, because everyone could relate to these two people, whether it was personal or a relative, a mother or an aunt, and so many people had lost loved ones, and it was kind of it was like the whole kit was there to play with.
Yeah, and Leah, I mean, there's, as much as we know how these stories go and how stories of COVID have gone, there was nothing predictable about this. I wasn't expecting Dan's sister, I wasn't expecting his sister to get sick. I really wasn't expecting Enid to end up in the hospital. I mean, you for as much as we know now about the trajectory of how this goes, there just wasn't anything at all predictable about it. And that must have been fun for you guys too, as actors to, each of those scenes brings us something new.
Yeah,
It's interesting because that was how it felt to write it, actually. Like every day I wrote it while my baby was napping, basically, over the period of a few weeks. And each day I would try to get to a place where I was like, okay, I'm stopping. I feel good about what I wrote today. I don't know what I'm going to write tomorrow. Maybe I'll take the dog for a walk and think of like what the next thing is. But like, I didn't know like where each next scene was going to start until I had the idea of where it was going to start. So.
Dan, were you going to say something?
No, I said a lot of people I talked to thought if anybody was going to die, it would be my character. Because we mentioned the sister was like the writer planted a seed, but grew it in a different field, came up on Wendy's, you know. But what I like most about the reaction is friends saying it allowed, by asking other people to watch this, they were able to talk about what they were feeling, that they were a little hesitant because how do you talk to somebody whose brother died or sister died or wife died? They would watch this and then they would get together and it started a lot of conversation, and you know that therapeutic release was needed not only by us as a creative team, but by the people who watch, by the audience. And that's what makes it universal right now. Unfortunately, that's what makes it universal, because we're going through, this is a terrible thing that affects everyone. You know, I think this would play in any country, anywhere right now.
Yeah, it
And
is
one of the
very
things
much
that
a
makes
universal story. But yeah, go ahead, Jim.
one of the things that makes it so that it's such a comparatively short piece for a for a play, and yet you get skin in the game. The audience, the people who are watching it, me, who's the audience representative when I'm watching rehearse, you get skin in the game so fast. You care about these people so much so fast, and I think a lot of that is because Leah doesn't ask you to. It's astonishing how it's early on. I mean, the world's worst first blind date, essentially. I mean, that there's so much that you're invited into their lives through all this comedy, and it's what's the line somebody said, like, comedy of awkward discomfort, horribleness, and there you suddenly are, and it's very hard not to fall in love with these people and to feel like they're me, or they're my brother, or they're my sister, or my mother, or my aunt, that's what Wendy said, that it feels like Dan has been saying, and I agree, I think this play is going to get done by a lot of people in a lot of places, even when times change, because, people under pressure trying to find a connection through horrible circumstances with this kind of joy and care, any language, anywhere.
Yeah, and we're going to talk. I want to talk a little bit more about that later, about what the future looks like in Zoom world and in the real world. But we do have a question from someone in our audience. Valerie Thomas has asked, Wendy and Dan, did the play impact you on a personal level, and how do you feel about it in the context of COVID? I think you've both touched on that, but
well, unfortunately, we both have too many friends that not only got sick, but some passed away. I remember when Mark Blum died.
Oh my God, I can't stop thinking about him.
Yeah, and Terrence McNally, and so we've all had friends. So it's hard. Unfortunately, we have too many connections to the theme behind this.
Yeah.
When.
But I think it's also the great great value of theater and of arts is it's a place where we all get to communally experience this thing that we are going through that has been so challenging for all of us, and for some in the extreme. And I think particularly the whole idea of loneliness, that so many people have been tackling this alone, people who live alone. I have friends who live alone in New York City, and this has been the challenge of their lifetimes. They may have gotten through it without getting sick, but it takes a different kind of toll on you. And I think knowing that you're not alone in feeling all of these things is such a great salve. It's such a great comfort. And I think, as actors, we can bring people in and share and have that sort of collective experience of getting through it together.
Yeah. And Leah, I mean, and this is really for all of you, but this play focuses on two people of a certain age. But I'd be interested to hear what kind of feedback you've been getting from younger people. Have you had younger people watching it and as part of the talkbacks? Because they're having a very different experience than we're having, but they're having an experience that will be with them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this theme of loneliness and trying to connect is like very universal to all ages. And the reason that I was particularly interested in exploring that theme in the context of older people is that we so rarely see that. Like, I feel like we see a lot of these stories about younger people, and we don't see these kinds of stories about older people very much. So I have gotten a really positive response from younger people because I feel like, that like theme of love and connection and all of that is very universal to people of different ages. But I specifically wanted to explore it in the context of older people just because that's so much less common.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
have to add that the scene after he doesn't show up that night for that Zoom date, when I'm doing that, I so flash back to being 19 again. I so flash back to being a young woman and knowing that feeling of, you think this relationship is going somewhere and then this guy doesn't call you, and it's like you go right back to being that young girl again. It's just something that doesn't ever leave you. And I think there's that interesting sort of combination of disappointment and heartbreak and shame and all of that stuff that,
And I'm never going to go on a date again.
and why did I ever open myself up to a guy? And why did I ever do
And
that?
we watched that whole journey and the arc of that on your face. It's just remarkable, Wendy, what you were able to convey in that scene that did. I mean, anybody who's ever been in that position at the age of 13 or 83 has
But that's the whole thing you should realize, and I think younger people realize, we still are all these vulnerable, fragile human beings who don't want to get hurt, and you put yourself out there and you risk getting hurt. But if you don't do that, then what's the point of living?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a question. Titi says she's going to reword the question. So, all right, well, I may just ask it anyway. So talk to us about the ending. Where did you feel like you were going with the ending of that? And where do you feel like you really ended up? I mean, I think, is there room for interpretation there?
I think there is. I have a feeling about what happens, but I think there is room for interpretation. I knew that I wanted to end the play with the two of them in the same space somehow. That was something that was really appealing to me because, the convention of being on Zoom is that we are not physically together. And then I knew that I wanted to play with that convention in some way, break that convention, and have them be together at the end of the play. And I didn't know how I wanted that to happen. So, like, for a while I was writing, I thought, maybe they have both quarantined for a while and then they just, get together in person and it's great and it's so nice. And then it kind of became clear to me as I was going through the play, like, no, that's not what this story is. And that's not, what this moment is. We are not really in a happy moment right now. So then I came up with the idea to do it this way. And, I feel like it is fairly clear what happens, but I think there's also some room to interpret that.
Yeah, I wonder if people have taken the bull by the horns and said, I know exactly what happens to her. And because I do think that it's open to interpretation. And I think that it's so striking to me in the end when Wendy comes on and is actually in the room with Dan. The first time I saw that, it was just very striking because we're not in rooms together. And we've all watched our fair share of Zoom and to see Dan's eyes, rolling his eyes, to see you standing next to him was very powerful. And I want you guys to tell us how you did the hospital bed.
Well, Jim did that.
The hospital. Well, I mean, it's funny because the play is actually written because Leah so carefully crafted it for Zoom. It's actually written so that, you can, even if you were to do it live rather than recorded, it's written so that you can use a double. In fact, as it's written, I always imagined it that the figure in the bed has, she's intubated and she's under a mask and maybe with other very sort of equipment heavy around her. So it really is written to be able to disguise, who that person is. We assume it's her because we sort of see, her hair and her figure and he's talking to her. and then to set it up so that the actress can come walking in. In the event, we were planning the Mile Square Theater, who was our producers when we were mounting it. The plan was that they were going to try to do. They were going to set up like a little kind of miniature set with like a hospital bed and and equipment, and then put in a double. But as it happens, because of things that were going on then, that wasn't ultimately possible technically to do. So we went shopping around for to find stock footage that we could license that resembled even a little bit either a figure that was very covered up, and we ended up I think it was Chris or Chris's production manager at Mile Square who managed to locate the footage we actually used and licensed it. It's less mechanized than we thought, so I think Leah could speak to that. It's a little more less jarring than I think it would be in a perfect world. But then oddly, watching it now in a perfect world, I mean, not only does everybody think it's Wendy, because everybody thinks it's Wendy, even though it's
Could have fooled me.
yeah, but that I think in a way there's something about not seeing them with all that equipment and sort of just seeing somebody who, if she would just open her eyes, would be there, but she's not gonna. That in itself ends up being a kind of, like this veil has dropped between them. That ends up being quite moving. But that's technically how it was. And of course, Wendy and Dan had to, quarantine and make sure that they were going to be, clear so that they could go into the same room. Maybe they'd like to talk about that, because that's heroism.
Like a little bit of a scary moment for you guys. I mean, how was that?
We felt pretty safe. We quarantined, but we were fine. I was looking forward to doing it. So
Yeah.
it was a well-written scene. It's still the most asked question. Why? How? What did the writer mean? I said, I don't know. I say the lines.
And also, I remember when we got, because it was the last thing we shot on the last day, and and it was evening when we shot it, and it's just, to see them appear after all this and after all the rehearsal, always separate, always in different cities, sometimes different states, because travel had happened in between, and then to see them in the same, it was emotional just to watch it, just to watch them enter frame, just to watch when Wendy enters frame. It was like something busted. It was like some kind of glass wall just shattered, and no matter how many times I see it, still has the same effect.
It's really powerful. It really is. John Eberhard in our chat has said, as a person in their 20s watching this, it's funny how similar the themes, now he went away. The themes in this were to a lot of my friends trying to date online over the past year. I mean, probably it could be younger people who are doing that more, but as we were talking about how this affects people generationally, talk about being able to relate to something.
Well, that's one of the exciting things also about the play, just as a play, just if it wasn't even this play, about this time in this place, anything that demolishes the differences between people is always like this little miracle. I mean, you have people who are 15, I know personally, who've said astonishingly sort of who are very powerfully affected by this, as well as people who are the same age and people who are older.
Yeah.
And you think of all the young people, my niece included, who had a freshman year at college and did it in her dorm and never got to have that experience of what it is to be on campus, and had a virtual graduation from high school. And these kids who have just been, at this time in their lives, you're supposed to spread your wings and fly, they were clipped, and all in that similar box that we've all felt ourselves trapped in. And so I think that it's relatable to people everywhere of all ages.
Well, and I know, Dan and Wendy, how really devoted you are to new work and to being able to be a part of bringing new work to life. And, so clearly this was something that that you would have wanted to kind of wrap yourself around anyway. But talk about that a little bit, and talk about what's been available to you over the last year, and what it means to be able to tackle some new work in the midst of all of this.
Oh, Dan,
Want the first one?
tell them about your baby.
Oh, the videos? Oh, yeah.
I was going to talk about that. So great. You talk about that. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the upsides is a lot of people have, because of COVID, because they're home, have written the thing they've always wanted to write. So, I've been getting more and more plays by writers, and it's always the same problem. They can't get regional theaters to produce new plays. So they see our videos with all the celebrities, and they asked me to send them to different people. And a lot of them have responded. I mean, Tony Shalhoub and Joe Kakachi were talking with Alfred Molina today about a new play that they want to do that I don't think would have happened if it wasn't for COVID.
I think you're right. I think it's fostered new relationships and new work. And for those of you who don't know about this, this is a series that is actually also on our website that you can watch, called Keeping Live Theater Alive. And Dan was the mastermind behind it. And, actors have been home just like the rest of us, itching to do something meaningful and creative. And you gave them an opportunity to do that. And boy, everybody leapt at it, and they're really beautiful pieces. Lisa is asking, Wendy and Dan, have you begun to plan for an in-theater performance? And did you find or read any other new cool plays? Are there theaters reaching out to you?
We were supposed to do a new play by Lee Blessing, right, Wen?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And where were you going to do that? At Durango?
You muted?
Yeah, I'll get him muted. I have a dog who's panting really, really loud. So I'll try to mute when I'm not.
That's a whole other play.
That's my next part.
Yeah. Dan and I, there's a dark comedy that that was written for us to do with my niece.
Oh, how great.
To do it last summer, and now we'll see when we can pull that out. Actually, a year ago summer, was it? I don't even know.
Oh. And what about the notion of doing this as a live performance?
Well, Wendy and I were instrumental in starting the Durango Play Fest, which is to develop new plays. And we've been talking to Leah and Jim about if we can open the doors in August, if we can all go there for a week and try to expand this, whether it's writing within the scenes that are already there or adding new scenes, whatever, we'll figure it out. And try to do it like a modern day love letters with two people at their desk with computers with a screen in the back. And I think if we can pull that off, I think it will be as popular as love letters, because it will be something that any theater can do on a Monday night and with any actor, because they can read off the screens and raise money for regional theaters. So I think this is, if we can work hard enough to get it to where it has the impact in a 90-minute play as it does for a 55-minute Zoom, I don't want to call it a play, but a Zoom vehicle, I think it's going to be important for regional theaters.
Yeah, and I mean, Dan, all of you have been so generous with your support of keeping theater alive and keeping live theater alive. It's been a rough year for everybody.
I wanted to mention, you did something a couple of years ago that I think is a very good way for a theater to open without a lot of rehearsal, but you can bring them in. When we did the radio play, a lot of people don't realize radio plays were done in front of a live audience.
Yeah, right.
And a play on Tesla, I mean, we need limited rehearsal. You have 5 people, could easily stay apart if it makes them up. But
yeah,
and no matter what you do, the Foley man steals the show. So.
Right, that's exactly right. Yeah, no, that's a wonderful thing to do, and it just in terms of actors and your schedules and people needing to go, really make money and where you can make money so that you can come back and do this thing that we don't actually, quite frankly, pay you a lot of money for, or any. I think we paid you so much for this one, didn't we? But it's it's nice to be able to think of you guys being able to come back and do something live like that, that just like Love Letters was. It was just so wonderful to do that. And you, with something like this in Tesla, if there are other people who want to perform it, or if you guys, take it for a long weekend at a theater somewhere, when we did Tesla, if anybody needed to step out of that and another actor needed to step in, it would, gave you the opportunity to do that because you have scripts in front of you. So
It was just made for
mentioned
touring.
the
It's just
play-
made for touring.
made for touring. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mentioned the play Sin, which was about cardinal law, which
Yeah,
works
yeah.
better read than it does performed. And again, we did that. And if anybody got a job, what was the one about the people who were wrongly convicted?
Exonerated.
The exonerated.
Exonerated, yeah.
Sure.
In New York, every other week, somebody would call me and say, "Hey, Richard Dreyfuss can't come tonight. Will you come down and read this part?" And we went down and we did it. And I think that's a great way for regional theaters to have a slow opening, is to line up a couple of these, just get people used to coming back, even if it's only one or two performances, and announce that on this date, 6 months from now, we're going to open with a regular schedule.
Right, and I see these experiences sort of like the canary in the mine. Let's
Yes.
try it. Let's see who comes. We don't know who's going to actually feel comfortable coming into a theater. We hope that, that's just going to become more robust as time goes on. But this is a great way to test the waters. Yeah, really wonderful. Beth Black asked, do you see podcasts as the new form of radio plays? It's an interesting question.
Yes.
And Jim says yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I feel like audio plays are having this big renaissance. I feel like they were starting to before this year. And then obviously this year, because that is, one of the primary forms of theater available, I feel like there's a lot of creativity and great stuff going on in that medium that is happening to people through podcasts. Yeah.
I've been saying for, 25 or 30 years that there's this whole world of radio drama that we heaved over the side of the boat, because not just drama, but radio drama and comedy, because of the availability of actors who, with time, if they only need a day, they would happily show up and perform with a lot of other great actors on a great script. And it's too bad that it took, pandemic to remind people that radio still exists as a form. So, yeah.
And a viable form, an entertaining form, and an enlightening form. Yeah.
I personally think what you're going to see a lot of is, if you remember the Actors Theater of Louisville, they had a 10-minute play contest.
Right.
I think we're going to see 10-minute plays, 2 or 3 characters shot in one location. Like Our Last Scene. It'll be easy to do, limited number of actors, maybe 2 cameras, a director who puts it together later so it's not live and doesn't have all the I think Zoom readings are terrible. I think they killing the theater.
Yeah, I was waiting for Dan to tell us how he really feels about this.
Oh.
That's it. You did. You're done now.
But I think if you do it the way Jim did this project, then I think, this is a viable medium.
When Dan first read this, I think the first thing he said to me, he called me up. I mean, it was a message, and then I called him back, and the message was just like, "Oh, this is a real play." I believe that was his.
Yeah, I said I'll do it if you don't do it live, and you said I have no intention of doing it live.
Yeah, I'm saying I have no intention to force actors to sit there and watch other actors go.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, clearly you were successful with this, and Leah gave you a piece that you could deliver successfully like this. I mean, I am too much to Dan's horror. I am going to talk a little bit about what it's going to mean moving forward for us to do this kind of work. Nothing can replace the theater. Nothing replaces the experience of sitting in a seat and the lights go down and something happens. And it happens in a way that it didn't happen last night, and it's not going to happen tomorrow night. And you can't replace that experience. But there are people who are infirmed, people who can't get to the theater for one reason or another, who might want to be enriched by a theatrical experience. And this may be the only way they get to for some period of time, or, if they're infirmed or elderly and can't get out, maybe the only way they do it. And I actually think that, this is going to be part of our lives, and Dan's grimacing over there, but
No, and this is where I disagree. In order to do it right, you have to do what Disney did with Hamilton. You know how how big that budget was? Now, they made a fortune on it. They made more money in the weekend they streamed it than the 3 years on Broadway. But if you've got to compete with filming a play with that budget, you're just going to wipe out all the little theaters.
here, I'm going to play devil's advocate to you, Dan, for this, because I've heard you give this response before. And my argument back to you is, don't you think that especially if there are people who are never going to have the opportunity to see Hamilton on stage, but don't you think that seeing something that excites people might make you want to go to the theater if you didn't go to the theater before?
Oh, it's going to make them want to see it when it comes on TV.
Yeah, see, that's where I disagree with you. I guess I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
I think I hear both of you, but I think there was a wonderful piece in the New York Times, I think it was a week ago, where someone who was handicapped was talking
right.
how much he appreciated Zoom, even though he knows it's not the same experience for him. He had a condition where he needed to leave at a moment's notice sometimes, and even if he could afford a ticket, oftentimes he couldn't stay for the whole thing. And it was looking at it from that person's point of view and realizing there is another way to experience it. It's not the same, and part of it is being in a room with other people. That's
right. That's what
but it's not available to everyone. I remember Betty White saying, I was having a debate with her about zoos, because having been to Africa and seeing what it's like to see these animals in the wild, even the San Diego Zoo, which is probably the best zoo that we have, how many miles most of those animals are supposed to have just for their daily getting around. And you look at it and it breaks your heart. And she said, but if we didn't have zoos, there are people who would never see these animals and they would never even know they existed. And it's not ideal, but it's the best that we can do for a lot of people who will never get to see them in the wild.
Right, but people have to go there. And if they can't, they watch a nature show.
And that's
it's a double-edged sword on that. I just wish the theater wasn't part of it.
I think also one point that Dan made, and I agree with pretty much everything's been said. I think one point that Dan made, that when people get into this conversation, they leave behind, but it's a point that Dan actually brought up, which is, if you can, like the Disney company, have 35 cameras and incredible lighting and cutting edge technology and shoot for 2 weeks, you can actually give people who can't possibly make it to the theater a chance to get a feeling of what going to Hamilton is. But the average place, that the average regional theater, under average regional theater budgets, the best they'll ever be able to do is a tremendous compromise. I mean, and it'll be, again, for people who can't make it to the theater, for people who are shut in, for people who are infirm, it will be better than nothing, but we'll never have, the average, SPT3 regional theater isn't going to have a crew of 17 people. They'll have 2 people with cameras, and the sound will be a little tinny, but you'll kind of hear it. And all of that ends up, the hard thing about it, because it's a chance to get at least a contact, but each one of those things puts one more layer between us and the actors, until then maybe, and the thing that would break my heart is if people watched it and went, yeah, I mean, this is fine, but why don't I watch a movie? Because a movie is really exciting. And then they'll start thinking, well, a play isn't as good as because I think the thing that's kind of miraculous about Leah's play is it's a play written for Zoom. So that's how it should be, it's built for this medium, and it's perfect. That's the way you can see it, because that's how it was written. But for things that aren't written for that medium, I think it becomes, like a series of veil cloths between the audience and you. And again, if you're Disney and you have all the money in the world to make it pretty good, but most regional theaters, they'll never be able to compete. That would be my worry. Well, but again, this is an exception.
Yeah, this is not a play. This is written for Zoom. So that's a whole other category. That's apples and oranges. But my analogy is, if you talk to any young filmmaker today, they'll tell you, isn't the technology great? Everybody can make their own movie. Right. And you know what's wrong with that? Everybody can make a movie. So they're all out there. Now, when I started, we literally had to rob cameras and only shoot on the weekends. I did Mario Van Peebles' first directing project. There were only 20 made that entire year. All 20 were seen and analyzed, and he took off as a director. Toronto Film Festival had 1,200 independent films submitted. God knows what little gem never got seen because they just can't watch them all.
Yeah, there's a lot of content. I mean,
everybody's going to put out a cheap version of Zoom plays, and only the rich companies are going to take off.
But Wendy, I've also heard you say, the bottom line is people are looking forward to being communally together.
Right.
Where, that we can say all we want about the value of doing this or the drawbacks of doing it this way. But the truth is, as the world opens up around us, and as we're, I got my second vaccine today. I feel like I've been given a new life. And I look forward to the time when I can actually be in a theater with other people. And I think that will override a lot of feelings about just wanting to stay home and watch things on a screen.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that has been whenever I ask people, so when we can do it, what do you miss the most? What are you most looking forward to? And it's always in the top 3, going into a theater and seeing a play. It's hearing live music,
right?
Sitting at a bar with my friends. But it's the communal experience of life and of finding joy with each other and of experiencing something together. And I think that, fortunately, Laguna has really been a pretty resilient theater over all these years. And I know this was a double whammy for you guys, as it was for everybody, but I have no doubt that your audience will come back. And,
this was our 100th anniversary season, the one that we're currently not in. So whatever version that we're doing now, this is the beginning of how we're celebrating 100 years. And we've been here for 100 years, which is, a very long time for a California theater. The country's not that old. The state certainly isn't that old. And, I think you're right. I do believe that our audience is stalwart and loyal. And this is a community that actually wants to come out and embrace live performances. But
sit around the campfire.
Well, that's it. That's how theater started.
I'm waiting for Wendy to say, no, Dan's the only one that old. She blew her chance. So. I was waiting for you to say I'm the only one that old, So.
You're probably the oldest person on the screen, but that's not a big whoop. So.
Well, yeah.
And Leah, for you, it's about time to wrap this up. But for you, obviously writing is a very singular thing, and unless you work with a writing partner, that's something you're doing on your own anyway. But how does it feel to you? Are you in New York?
I was before the pandemic, and then I spent about 6 months in Rhode Island with my in-laws, and then we've spent, some time out in Colorado because that's where my parents live. So my family's just been moving around a lot the last year. So I guess I would say I'm still New York based, but I'm also sort of Colorado based currently.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure you're looking forward to having a different kind of feedback to the work that you do,
Yeah, it's interesting because writing is a solitary thing, but playwriting's not, really. And that's what I'm realizing the more and more, the further I get in my career is I think you can write a good play by yourself. I don't think you can write a great play by yourself. I think you need collaborators to write a great play. And, having had the chance to work with these kinds of collaborators has been amazing. And that's been really a gift of the pandemic for me, is to get to work with people who, geographically I wouldn't be able to, or, they'd be too busy with other projects or whatever it is. So that's been really lovely. And yeah, I can't wait to be working with people in person again.
Well, I have a question to end all of this with for all of you and each of you. Although I don't know if Dan's going to know how to answer this. What are you hopeful about moving forward? I mean, just what makes you hopeful?
The writing.
Yeah.
I really think a lot of people have been able to reflect. And of course, I don't know how we get regional theaters to do them, but I think we're going to have a whole slew of really provocative, interesting, in-depth plays coming out of this.
Yeah. And do you think, I mean, do you think the moment will come and go that people will want to watch plays about the pandemic? Or do you think it's the beginning of
any other piece of history? There'll be, as long as it's realistic like this play, there'll always be a market for it. 25 years from now, kids that aren't even born will look at this and say, wow, is that how people met during that time? What is this pandemic? And they'll ask.
Also, it's like saying, well, people, who's going to watch Shakespeare because, it's a long time ago and love doesn't look like that. Or nobody's going to watch a play that's about World War II because people in World War, that's from there's something about people trying to reach out with their heart through some kind of, field of broken glass that's getting in their way between the two. And right now that field of broken glass is that Zoom screen. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're trying to get through.
Yeah, I'm going to put the gloom on this one too. What makes you think this is going to be the last pandemic? Well, it's going to come back and back again. I hate to say it, but it's going to be more relevant. Within 10 years, we'll have.
Look, I mean, Shakespeare wrote his most important works during a pandemic. So,
three times, the globe was closed, 3 different plague epidemics. And right. What did he do? During one of them, he wrote Lear. During another one, he wrote Hamlet. So, it was a lot of pent up readiness when it opens up again.
And when you talk about World War II, do you think that I would have thought that any of those people of my parents' generation who lived through World War II, did they really want to see a play or a musical about World War II? But, musicals, Anchors Away, you name it. There were plenty of plays and musicals about the Second World War, and people flocked to the theater to see it because, again, it was a common experience.
Of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, best years of our life.
We're living through a moment that is transformative, and watching people live with those moments and try to find love, contact. I have a feeling people are always going to want to see.
And also in gratitude. And I think, one of the great possibilities coming out of all of this is that we all are realizing more and more, what do you really need? What do you really need in your life? What really fills your heart and your soul and brings you joy? And I think a lot of people are reassessing what the answer to that question is, so that when we can convene, whether it's in a theater or a concert hall or on a dance floor or around a dinner table with your friends, it's like holding on to that gratitude and realizing that we lost it for a long time. So now people know what it's like not to have it. And hopefully you'll file that and remember that every day's a gift and don't squander it.
Well, I think you get the last word, Wendy, because I do want to leave us on a positive note here. And I do agree with you. Thank you.
You don't want me to comment. Okay.
Yeah, Dan, shut up.
Shut up. Okay.
If you have something nice, say something nice, Dan. Okay.
Yes, I love this project, and I think it's going to go on. I'm looking forward to making it the next Love Letters.
I am too, and I'm also looking forward to, Leah, what you bring us next, because the fact that you wrote this with a toddler or a baby at home is pretty impressive just to start with. So, but we do thank you, Jim, for all you've done with this. We do have to thank our friends at Miles Square Theater in Hoboken, New Jersey, who've brought this to us, and Chris O'Connor, who produced this, who's the artistic director there, and
it's behind us every step of the way.
It's just, really wonderful. So thank you all. I can't wait to see you in person, and we'll all be back together again. I do believe it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. See you at the next one.
Yeah. Wendy, you need to make a trip down to Laguna. We need to go to the lumberyard.
Yeah.
All right. You're on. Bye, everybody. Thanks again.
Great bar.
Great bar.